I'm Christian Toto, a New York native, a lifelong Monkees fan, and yes, a conservative movie critic. What's that? Well, for a very long time, I would have asked the exact same question. I had no idea either. I became a working film critic in the early 2000s, and I was just so happy to get the gig, I didn't want to label it or even think about what that meant. I just wanted to review movies, the good ones, the bad ones, and steer people away from the latter. That's what a good film critic should do. That's our main objective. And sometimes we forget that that's the prime directive, but that is exactly why we're here, to help you spend your time watching good films and not wasting time on the lousy ones. And sadly, there are a lot of lousy ones, but comes with the territory. And thank you to the Washington Times who gave me a shot, who let me be a full-time critic at that newspaper. It was a dream come true. It took a long, long time. I've been into that story elsewhere. I won't repeat it, but boy, what an absolute blessing it was to review films for a publication like that. But I really wasn't a conservative film critic even then.
Conservative, but not entirely unfun.
Then I was trying to shoot as straight as possible. I remember I interviewed a popular conservative one time, and I was throwing him a lot of softballs. I wouldn't say who it was because it's not really important, but my editor scolded me at the time and said, "You should have asked tougher questions." And he was absolutely right. But that's what I was back then at the Washington Times. I was living the dream. I was Siskel and Ebert, and nothing made me happier than reviewing movies and sharing my love for them with the public, thanks to the Washington Times. And then 9/11 happened. And as it happened to be, I was working in Washington, D.C. at the time. I actually drove past the Pentagon, I'd say roughly an hour before it was hit by an airplane. And it changed me. I think up until that point, I was fairly apolitical. And if there was a leaning either way, it was probably left of center. I remember the 1980s and the moral majority, and there were attempts, I don't know, to squelch free speech, but certainly to criticize it in a way that didn't rub me the right way. Let's just put it that way. And so I was vaguely on the left. But after 9/11, I changed. And I don't have a lot in common with Dennis Miller. He is a comedy genius. But he said 9/11 changed him, and he became a conservative because of it. And it had the same effect on me as well. I looked how both parties examined the fallout from that horrible, awful day. And I thought, I think I want to throw my lot in with them and not them. So when I left the Washington Times a few years later, I thought, well, what path will I follow? Can I continue to be a film critic? Would I be forced to get a real job? That sounds terrible. I reached this pinnacle. I did exactly what I wanted to do for such a long time. So what do I do next? So I had two choices. I could have been another film critic, another center leaning critic, another critic who just doesn't really take sides in the culture wars, or I could be true to myself and be a right leaning film critic.
I'm not insightful enough to be a movie critic.
So now I was a conservative, but it didn't really impact my movie reviews. It flavored my worldview, but that was more or less it. But then as I awakened to a political identity, I started to realize that my fellow film critics, well, they were not letting their politics stay out of the frame. They incorporated them into their reviews. Perhaps the best example, and the most glaring, is Roger Ebert, the great Roger Ebert. Well, his reviews started to have his ideology seeping into the narrative. He was someone who was honored and revered, and rightly so. But all of a sudden, I could read his reviews and sense his ideology, or just read it outright. I thought, wow, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. But then I also noticed that his peers started doing the same. And of course, this was during the Bush years, where politics were really becoming front and center, kind of invading all parts of culture. It's kind of the world we live in right now, but it was newer then, at least to me. So when I left the Washington Times, I had a decision to make. Do I continue as a film critic? Do I actually get a real job? That sounds kind of terrifying. Or do I branch off, go solo, and be a right of center film critic, which is really true and dear to my heart? Well, I chose that path for two reasons. One, like I said, full transparency. I think it's important to be who you are. But also, I looked around and I thought, from a pragmatic point of view, there aren't that many film critics on the right.
You know what it's like up there in the woods, all alone.
Right. I joke about this for years, and it's still pretty much true. You can take all the conservative film critics and stuff them into a clown car, and you'd have a lot of leg room left over. There just aren't that many of us. So when I went solo and decided to have a freelance career, I thought, well, that makes the most sense, doesn't it? We need people on the right to have a reviewer for them. So that's what I've been doing for the past 20 years. And it's amazing because I'm still 33 years old. I don't know how that works, but it's a miracle. So let's get to the heart of the matter. How do my conservative beliefs influence my movie reviews? And I think if I give you two examples, it'll help define what I'm talking about and maybe help explain the whole point of this video. The first movie is 2024's Reagan.
Welcome to your life.
There's nothing a retired governor can do, but a president, now he can do a thing or two.
Now, a lot of critics didn't like it. You can look at the Rotten Tomato score. It is pretty darn sour, or rotten, as they say. Well, I had the opposite point of view. I thought it was pretty darn good. Now, it had flaws. I thought the first third of the film was too cutesy with its biographical details. It felt too pat in a way. I wanted to get to the heart of the story, which, of course, is Reagan as a leader and as a politician and as a man who ended the Cold War. Well, once we got there, I think the film really picked up steam and really found its purpose. And of course, I thought Dennis Quaid was terrific as the Gipper. I couldn't think of a better actor or more apt actor to take over that role and really kind of capture the optimism, the joy, and the focus that Reagan brought to the presidency. So I gave it a good review. Again, flawed, again, had some issues, but I thought it was a pretty positive, interesting portrayal. And at the same time, I let my readers know it was fairly one-sided. This was a laudatory biopic of President Reagan. This was not one that's really looking to highlight his flaws. And yes, there are some flaws here, including the Iran-Contra affair, but that wasn't really a significant part of the story. And again, you could argue that should have been more in focus in the film. That's a fair debate. But most of my fellow critics who are, like I said, very, very left of center, some aggressively so, well, they loathed it.
Ronald Reagan, he said also, socialism works only in heaven.
And they put it on their worst of the year list. And of course, to them, the fact that he was a freedom fighter, the fact that he was against communism, the fact that he's been a GOP darling and an icon for decades now, I don't think that rubbed them the right way. And I think that influenced their reviews too. So that's an example of why, A, I am a conservative film critic, and B, why we need a conservative film critic, at least more of them, because half the country is right of center and they should have a voice. But let me show you another movie that shows the opposite side of the situation and how I reacted to it. The movie's called Booksmart. It came out in 2019, and it's about two budding feminists and their desire to let loose at the end of their high school days because they've been studying and working hard and volunteering where all their friends are out gallivanting and having a gay old time. Well, they missed it. They missed out, and they want to have a taste of that life before they go on to the real world, college.
Amy, you've been out for 2 years and you've never kissed a girl.
I really don't know what I'm doing with all that stuff.
I have a secret for you. I once tried to masturbate with an electric toothbrush, but I got a horrible UTI.
Yeah.
Like, horrible.
I wish that would have been a secret, but you've mentioned it many, many times.
Now, the film is very woke. It is very progressive. It has got lectures. It has got comic bits that are meant to emphasize the left of center leanings of the entire cast and crew, or at least the mission that they had to put this movie into theaters. Absolutely no question about it. So I hated it, right? Not really. I liked it. I liked it because it was funny, because it was fresh, because it was original, because first-time director Olivia Wilde did an excellent job taking the traditional teenage comedy format, giving it a spin or two. I think she's one to watch in the future. Have to see what other movies that she makes after this. Didn't love Don't Worry, Darling, but that's besides the point. So I gave this a positive review. I let my readers know all the progressive bona fides about it. Is it bona fides or bona fides? I never get that right. Anyway. That was my review. I said it was fresh and it was funny and it was interesting and it was woke as possible. But I couldn't give it a negative review because it was a good movie and it wouldn't be fair to my readers and it wouldn't be fair, absolutely not, to the people who made the film because they did a good job and they shouldn't be punished because they are left of center. So I think in a way that really captures who I am and what a conservative film critic should do. Review movies, let the readers know about the political bias, maybe embrace or lean into the right-leaning elements of a film, or at least highlight them, or at least don't, give demerits to a movie because it is right of center. But at the end of the day, just be fair and honest and be truthful to the movie and to your reader. I couldn't say that Reagan was perfect because that wouldn't be fair. And I wouldn't say that Booksmart was terrible because that's not honest either. So that's just a snippet, a glimpse of what a right-leaning film critic does and how we think. Now, to back up a little bit, most film critics just let their biases seep into their reviews, and they do it on a lot of different platforms. Now, I've always said that if you work for The Nation or The New Republic or HuffPo and you're left of center, then you should absolutely let your liberal freak flag fly, because that's what the reader expects. It doesn't seem incongruous at all to be a left-leaning critic reviewing for a left-leaning outlet. That's a marriage made in heaven. You're transparent and you're honest and you're in sync with your reader. The same with National Review. If you're right of center, then that should be your calling right there. But I have a bone to pick with critics who work for the Associated Press or the Washington Post, other supposedly neutral outlets, and we can snicker all you want, but that's what they try to be. I don't think those critics should be biased and left of center or even right of center. I think that's a mistake as well. At the end of the day, it's about transparency. You know where my beliefs are, you know where I work, and you know how I'm going to approach a particular film. And then it's up to you to read me, trust me, agree with me, or disagree with me. That's it. Now, I will say that I don't always work for conservative outlets. I do contribute to The Blaze and The Daily Wire, The Federalist once in a while. I've written for the New York Post, but I also contribute a time or two to radio stations that are straight down the middle. And I have to say aggressively so and honestly so. And when I review films for that particular outlet or two, I play it down the middle. I hold my biases in. I try to be as fair and balanced as humanly possible. Am I perfect? I doubt it. Have I made mistakes? Probably. Have I tipped my hat in a way along the years? Probably as well. But one particular outlet I've been working for over 20 years now, and they're still calling upon me to review films. And I couldn't be happier about it and couldn't be more proud that I'm part of that system. At the end of the day, like I said, you're a film critic. It's steering people to the good movies and steering them away from the clunkers. That matters. Transparency, honesty, and being true to the movies. Because at the end of the day, even the worst movies have so much blood, sweat, and tears tied into them, so many millions poured into them, so many hours and hours of hard work dedicated to making that movie. And they're not set out to make a clunker. They tried their darndest in most cases. They deserve a fair and honest shake, and that's what I try to give them as a conservative movie critic. Now, in recent years, we've seen critics like The Critical Drinker and groups like Film Threat. And when you watch some of their videos and catch their reviews, they almost sound like me at times, like they're conservatives. But, I've spoken to them, I've gotten to know them a little bit. They're actually not conservative. They're actually not political. They just want great films. And they've seen this woke revolution take over, and they've seen how creativity has been snuffed out by this stifling mindset. And so at times they sound a little bit like me, or I sound a little bit like them. But they really aren't conservative film critics in the truest sense. They're just honest brokers who have a certain opinion that I think overlaps with mine, or I can overlap with them. So that's it. There you go. That's what a conservative film critic does. It's about transparency. It's about honesty. It's about being fair to the content in question, and also being straight with your audience. My right of center fans know what I'm going to bring to the story, know my perspective, and know if I give it a good review, even if it's left of center, it might be trustworthy. Now, you can always disagree with my point of view. Of course, films are always subjective in what we like and don't like. But at the end of the day, I hope I have that connection with the reader, and I hope I offer something different. A unique perspective in the critical community. Because if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, you're not going to find too many people like me. It's just the way it is. So there you have it. What I hope is a full-bodied explanation of what a conservative film critic is, what he or she does, and why they're needed in the marketplace. But at the end of the day, no matter my ideology or my colleagues' ideology, if there's a great movie out there, I think we can all rally around it, support it, sing its praises, and say, hey, Hollywood, why don't you make a few more just like that? Because sometimes with a great movie, we can still all get along, even in our divided times. Thanks for watching. Again, if you want to find out more about me, you can go to hollywoodintoto.com. That is my website. I update it 7 days a week, or just come back and subscribe to this channel. You can find me on iTunes, Rumble, and of course, YouTube. And I'll see you next time. And if you have more questions about what it is to be a conservative film critic, let me know in the comments section, or you can just email me. Christian@hollywoodintoto.com. Yeah, I keep the branding consistent because when you got a name like Toto, you got to lean into it. Thanks again.